Ivey for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's a complicated area. I mean, just sort of what we're going through. For example, the statement that there's no specific truth, which I think sounds fine in the abstract, but if you say something like, you know, sir, if someone accused you of being a sexual pedophile, you know, how would you respond? That's a false statement. That's definitely not true. And so when we say there's no such thing as truth, I do kind of struggle with those. With the issue with respect to elections, Mr. Crane's gone. We had a chance to chat a little bit outside, but just briefly, and I'll come back to this point, I did want to note that he mentioned public officials aren't trusted, but only public official can certify elections. So, you know, if there's no public official in Arizona that's going to say the election is accepted, it's usually the Secretary of State. I don't know what they do out there with that, but I'm pretty sure they do it just like all the other 50 states do. But anyway, back to this point. I think really quick on that point, we talked about government speech and what they do. Wear your seatbelts. I'm old enough to remember a time before we had seatbelts, and then there was a pushback about putting them in the cars, and then there was pushback and free speech pushback, but statements I think were clearly false, that they weren't necessary, they didn't save lives. I'm okay with the government doing that. Tobacco's another one. You know, I grew up in North Carolina and Virginia. Everything, they almost had tobacco-flavored pacifiers in North Carolina back in those days because it was the way to go, but clearly it was dangerous to our health. You know, I don't even know if the tobacco industry has come around to acknowledging that, but clearly it's true. It hurts your health, and clearly when their denials were false. Another one's drunk driving. I remember when, you know, people have a steering wheel in one hand and, you know, a beer in the other one, and it was okay. That had to change over time because it was true that driving and drinking were a bad combination. So I think it can be tricky if we, you know, get too absolute in the statements that we're making along these lines. And I do take Professor Turley's point, although even in those circumstances, I think there's scenarios where it makes sense for the government to at least be involved. Now, we might not say they should be able to take down information, but you know, in the damaging scenarios that we talked about, for example, or you know, people giving false weather information, you know, just things that can really cause dislocations in people's lives. I think it should be an option for the government to say, no, that's incorrect. We run into scenarios with respect to COVID and others. I take that point, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but I think we have to be careful about sort of pushing and saying none of them can get involved. And I apologize. We were just talking about we wish we had more than 5 minutes. I mean, sort of the question I had, Mr. Weingarten, you raised, well, and Mr. Turley too, I guess, sort of the private entities coming together to have communications about what to take down or whatever. And I take it you view that as, you know, you see negative connotations around that. I do kind of wonder if there's some good reasons for them to do that. For example, lawsuits in the government are now pushing them in the direction of they're being pushed towards managing content. And if they don't, they get in trouble for it. Matter of fact, they get dragged up here by Congress, who beats them up about not taking it down. We could go back to the TikTok hearing, what was that, last month? I don't agree with everything TikTok's doing, but we are putting a lot on them and expecting them to manage content and essentially publicly punishing them when they don't. So there may be a reason they're having those conversations. Maybe we'll have another hearing where, you know, people can come up and from DHS and from some of these entities. I'm open to that. We could talk about it then. I did want to finish with this. Nina Jankowicz, I did want to not leave that unfinished. There's a couple articles I'd like to offer for the record. One is a surreal experience. Former Biden info chief details harassment. That's out of Politico. And then the other one is Old comments by Disinformation Board Director misrepresented online. That's an AP story. I'd like to offer those for the record as well.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman yields back, and